Our European Union leaders are set to commit to reducing the bloc's dependence on China. On the second day of a summit in Brussels, they aim to strike a balance between what has become known as de-risking and engaging in areas such as climate change. Draft conclusions for the summit say the EU will reduce critical dependencies and vulnerabilities, adding that it intends to de-risk and diversify wherever necessary. It's also called on China to press Russia to stop the war in Ukraine and express concern about Beijing's growing tensions in the Taiwan Strait. And for more, Alex Carrier joins us live from Brussels. Alex, the EU has just wrapped up discussions on a united stance on China. What were the key takeaways?
Well, the key takeaways is that there is some warm words and then some not so warm words in that position on China. They're very clear. The European Union sees China as an important partner, also a systemic rival. They want to work with China on things, as you mentioned, like climate change, like biodiversity, like health. Pandemic preparedness is certainly an area that the EU and China are eager to work on together. So that's the positive words, the warm words, wanting to recognize that trade with China is very important. On the other hand, some pretty strong language on Taiwan, urging against any change to the status quo through coercion or force, opposing any change to that status quo in the Taiwan Straits, and urging to maintain the one China policy. That was clear in the language as well, calling out human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region of China and urging China to maintain its commitments towards Hong Kong. So some strong language there. And as you mentioned, that talk of de-risking, not decoupling, but de-risking that relationship with China, reducing those dependencies on things like critical raw materials, on rare earths, for example, that the EU is so dependent on China for. Now, it's interesting to know, you mentioned that we just heard from the business update that ASML legislation from the Netherlands. You have to remember that when it comes to export controls and the kind of sharper, harder, reactive policies that these European states can do, it is a national concern for them. So we won't hear that from the EU. But what's clear is that although this might not be very, very new compared to what we've heard in the last few months, it does represent a very significant shift in EU policy if you look back from before the invasion of Ukraine. So some common position, some areas of working together, and quite a lot of areas of difference too.
As you mentioned, Alex, in fact, this term systemic rival, that has been the EU's official designation for China since March 2019. But the movements we are seeing now, is there any particular significance to the timing?
Yeah, there is significance to that timing. Of course, the main moment, the main event that will have changed the European Union's perspective on this is Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent realization of perhaps an over-dependence on Russian fossil fuels for Europe's energy, which then prompted an energy crisis which affected households across the European Union. Now, the EU wants to reduce its dependencies. It's, to be clear, not just on China. I was just speaking to European officials just a few moments ago. They really wanted to stress this is not just about China. Of course, this language is, but the idea of de-risking is just to make the EU less dependent on a single source and perhaps diversifying that dependency to more reliable and like-minded partners. So that is the timing. Of course, there's also been quite a lot of pressure from the United States, who have wanted the EU to hold a harder, harsher line against Beijing. Unclear whether or not this will be enough for those American counterparts. But again, speaking to European officials from countries that are more hawkish when it comes to their China policy, they're saying, look, we are much further along than where we were a year ago. Some of the more China-friendly member states have now moved forward from their position as it was a year ago. So they're happy for now. The bloc is moving forward and strengthening its position on China.
Oh, thanks so much for that. Alex Carrier speaking to us there from Brussels.
Now, on the same day, the European leaders are plotting a China strategy. The bloc's most valuable tech company has found itself in the middle of the West's tech row with Beijing. The Netherlands has published rules that limit ASMLs from exporting its sophisticated chip-making equipment to China. The rules do not mention China or ASML specifically. The Dutch government said the move was made in the interests of its national security. Still, the rules make it necessary for ASML to apply for export licenses for some of its advanced lithography systems. The measures will take effect on September the 1st. ASML has a near monopoly on the machines that chip makers need to produce the most advanced semiconductors. Now, China accounted for 14% of sales last year. Remember, the US imposed export curbs on shipments of American chip-making tools to China in October. It also lobbied for other countries with key suppliers to adopt similar curbs. The Netherlands is one that agreed to join the alliance. The US is reportedly planning to force ASML to ship fewer machines to 6 chip plants in China, including one operated by SMIC. The Chinese embassy in Washington has decried the move, saying that the US has deliberately blockaded and hobbled Chinese firms and forcibly relocated industries and pushed for decoupling.